Hey everybody, Jordan Brown here with fun and affordable MTG, bringing you another Tiny Leaders deck tech. Today we're going to be looking at Ambassador LaQuatus as our commander. He is a 1/3 for 1 blue that reads, pay 3 mana, target player puts the top 3 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. So in case you can't tell, this is going to be a mill deck, and from looking at the deck list right over here, we're going to be a mono blue deck list. Let's go ahead and look at the cards in detail. Creatures are first, as per usual, and at the beginning of the line we have Cathartic Adept, which is a 1/1 for blue that reads, tap. Target player puts the top card of his or her library into his or her graveyard. Next we have Hedron Crab, which is a 0/2 for blue, with landfall. Whenever the land enters the battlefield under your control, target player puts the top 3 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. Minister of Inquiries is a 1/2 for blue that says when Minister of Inquiries enters the battlefield, you get 2 energy counters. Then you can tap and pay an energy. Target player puts the top 3 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. Salvage Drone is a 1/1 for blue with Devoid, which means it has no color, and Ingest, which means whenever it deals combat damage to a player, that player exiles the top card of his or her library, which is very similar to Mill. It's not going to tick off any of our stuff that counts for cards in the graveyards, but it's still going to remove cards from there whenever it deals damage. When Salvage Drone dies, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. So it lets us, if we lose it or need to use it as a blocker for whatever reason, we can loot off of it. We also have Augur of Bolas, which is a 1/3 for 1 in blue. When Augur of Bolas enters the battlefield, look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may reveal an instant or sorcery card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Fogbank is a 0/2 for 1 in blue with Defender and Flying, and reads prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to and dealt by Fogbank, making it a pretty universally good blocker, provided our opponent does not have unblockable creatures. Grimoire Thief is a 2/2 for blue. Whenever Grimoire Thief becomes tapped, remove the top 3 cards of target opponent's library from the game face down. You may look at cards removed from the game with Grimoire Thief. Then you can pay a blue, sacrifice Grimoire Thief, turn all cards removed from the game with Grimoire Thief face up, counter all spells with those names. That ability is not going to be useful at all, considering Tiny Leaders is a singleton format, but whenever it becomes tapped, as in whenever we attack with it, it's going to remove the top 3 cards of target opponent's library from the game. Similar to that Ingest trigger, it's not quite Mill, but it's still going to get those cards out of there and get us closer to our win condition. Merfolk Mesmerist is a 1/2 for 1 in a blue, who we can pay a blue and tap. Target player puts the top 2 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. We've also got, to finish up our creatures list, a couple more Devoid Ingest creatures. Mist Intruder is a 1/2 for 1 in blue, with Devoid, Flying, and Ingest. Benthic Infiltrator is a 1/4 for 2 in blue, with Devoid, Ingest, and Benthic Infiltrator can't be blocked. Ruination Guide is a 3/2 for 2 in blue, with Devoid, Ingest, and other colorless creatures you control get +1/+0. Here are our spells now. We've got Broken Ambitions for X in blue. Counter target spell unless its controller pays X. Clash with an opponent. If you win, that spell's controller puts the top 4 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. Each clashing player reveals the top card of his or her library, then puts that card on the top or bottom. A player wins if his or her card had a higher converted mana cost. Dream Twist costs a blue. Instant. Target player puts the top 3 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard, and we can flash it back for 1 in a blue. Increasing Confusion is another X in blue spell. Target player puts the top X cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. If Increasing Confusion was cast from a graveyard, that player puts twice that many cards into his or her graveyard instead, and of course it has Flashback X and blue. Then of course we've got Spell Pierce for blue, counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 2. Thought Scour is a blue for target player puts the top 2 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard, then we draw a card. Tome Scour also costs a blue, and target player puts the top 5 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. Censor is a counterspell for 1 and a blue that counters target spell unless its controller pays 1, and we can cycle it for blue if we just need to draw something else and aren't looking to counter anything at the moment, or just opponent has way too much mana. Compelling Argument costs 1 and a blue. Target player puts the top 5 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard, and we can cycle it for a blue early game. We also got Essence Scatter, which is 1 and a blue, counter target creature spell. Negate is kind of a mirror of that. It costs 1 and a blue to counter target non-creature spell. And Abstruse Interference costs 2 and a blue. It is devoid, meaning it has no color. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 1. You put a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature token onto the battlefield. It has sacrifice this creature, add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. We've also got the most common counterspell in the game, Cancel, which costs 1 and 2 blue to counter target spell, and Countervailing Winds, which costs 2 and a blue to counter target spell unless its controller pays 1 for each card in your graveyard, and of course it's got cycling too. Dissolve is our last counterspell, which costs 1 blue to counter target spell and scry 1. Next up, we're going to go ahead and look at our artifacts. We've got Grind Clock for 2, and we can tap it to put a charge counter on Grind Clock, or tap it and target player puts the top X cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard, where X is the number of charge counters on Grind Clock. Mind Crank also costs 2, and whenever an opponent loses life, that player puts that many cards from the top of his or her library into his or her graveyard. This is going to combo out great with like our Devoid creatures, especially the ones that have unblockable. Any of our cards that when they like our Grimoire Thief, when it becomes tapped, mills, exile mills, and then also if it deals damage, it'll get some normal mill in too. So really, it's a good solid card in this deck. Enchantments, we've got Jace's Erasure for 1 and a blue. Whenever you draw a card, you may have target player put the top card of his or her library into his or her graveyard. We've got Memory Erosion for 1 and 2 blue. Whenever an opponent plays a spell, that player puts the top 2 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. Sphinx's Tutelage, which costs 2 and a blue. Whenever you draw a card, target opponent puts the top 2 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. If they're both non-land cards that share a color, repeat this process. And then we can pay 5 and a blue to draw a card, then discard a card, which will trigger Sphinx's Tutelage first ability. And of course, we've got probably one of the strongest cards in this deck, Fraying Sanity for 2 and a blue, Enchant Player. At the beginning of each end step, Enchanted Player puts the top X cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard, where X is the number of cards put into that graveyard from anywhere this turn. That means whenever they cast spells that go to the graveyard, or creatures get destroyed and go to the graveyard, or we mill them, they mill. This essentially doubles our mill. I mean, are you going to pass that up? Would you pass that up? And of course, we round out the deck with a very diverse land base of 18 islands. That's right, 18 islands. So, once again, this has been an Ambassador LaQuatus Tiny Leaders Deck Tech. You can find the URL to find this deck on MTG Goldfish right up here at the top. And if you want to buy this from TCG Player, you can pay $23.95 to get it through TCG Player Direct, or from verified sellers for $19.96. Once again, the music featured in this video was by Kevin McLeod, so thank you again to him, and thank you to you all for watching. I hope you have a great day and an awesome time playing Tiny Leaders.